Idaho Territory, August 1873. The morning sun had barely burned through the mountain mist when Selah North staggered down the rocky trail, her baby burning with fever against her chest and her boots soaked through from crossing the Salmon River. Her dress was torn at the hem, her braid falling loose, and her arms ached from carrying little Olive for what felt like 100 miles. The child whimpered now and then, weakly, but mostly she just slept too quiet, too still. Selah had left everything behind in Missouri. Her husband had died that spring, taken by the same fever that now gripped their baby. When the doctor in Jefferson said there was nothing more he could do, Selah had packed what she could carry, wrapped Olive tight, and headed west. Folks whispered of cleaner air, warmer winters, and a healer in the territory who knew how to treat children with lung sickness. It was a hope then, wild, but all she had. The trail was rough and lonely. She had not seen another soul in 3 days. Her food was near gone. Her horse had gone lame 2 nights back and she had to let it go. Still, she kept walking. For her daughter, when she crested the next rise, she saw smoke curling up from a small camp below a fire, and next to it, a man. Not young, not old, just weather-worn and still. His hat was low, but she saw the rifle leaned against a stump and her heart jumped. Selah stopped, adjusted Olive against her chest, and called out, "Hello!" The man looked up, slow and calm, his eyes catching hers through the haze. "You lost?" he said, voice low and even. She hesitated. "My child's sick. I need help. I heard there was a healer west of the Salmon." He stood up then, tall and strong, his boots silent in the dirt as he came closer. "You crossed that river alone?" "I had to." He looked at the bundle in her arms. "The baby breathing?" "Barely." He nodded once like that was all he needed to hear. "Come to the fire. Sit. I will get water on." She followed without a word. The man moved easy, his long coat dusty, his dark hair brushing his collar. He poured water into a dented tin pot and hung it over the flames. Then he brought a blanket and spread it for her to sit. She sank to the ground, legs trembling. "I am Elias Orton," he said as he knelt beside her. "Selah North." He pulled back the blanket from Olive's face. His brow furrowed. "She is burning up." "How long has she been like this?" 3 days, Selah whispered. "No appetite. Her breathing's shallow." He looked at her, steady and serious. "There's no healer close. But I have some knowledge. Enough to try." Selah's eyes filled. "You would help us? You got this far alone. You did not give up." "That says plenty about you." Then he added, quieter, "I would not turn away a mother with a sick child. Not out here." He took out a pouch of herbs from his saddlebag and began to crush them into a tin cup. "This will help her breathe easier. It is not a cure, but it might ease the fever." She watched his hands, careful, practiced. "You a doctor?" "No," he said, "but I learned from one who was. Years ago." Selah laid Olive down on the blanket, her little chest rising and falling too fast. Elias took a cloth, soaked it with the steaming mix, and pressed it gently to the baby's skin. The scent of pine and mint filled the air. They sat in silence then, the fire crackling, the sky fading to dusk. Selah clutched her arms around herself, shivering. "You cold?" Elias asked. She nodded. He stood, shrugged off his coat, and draped it around her shoulders. "You need rest. Sleep if you can. I will keep watch. I do not know how to repay you. You do not owe me anything." Still, she looked at him, really looked. His face was worn from sun and wind, his eyes steady like river stones, and there was something in the way he moved, quiet but sure, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could breathe again. "I do not even know where I am," she said softly. "You are about 8 miles from Elk Bend. We are still in Idaho Territory. You walked far. I had no choice." He nodded. "I respect that." Night fell slow and quiet. Elias fed the fire. Selah dozed with Olive in her arms, Elias's coat still wrapped tight around her. As the baby slept, her breathing eased just a little. The fever still held on, but not as fierce. Around midnight, Selah woke to find Elias sitting nearby, sharpening a knife by firelight. He looked up when she stirred. "She is cooler," she whispered. He nodded. "That is good." Selah studied him, the way he sat, calm and sure, like he had done this 100 times. Do you live out here alone? I move around, trade some, guide folks when they need it. No wife. No children. His gaze dropped for a moment. Not anymore. Selah's heart tugged. She did not ask more. The next morning, Elias led her to a small cabin tucked between the pines. It had a stove, a cot, and shelves lined with supplies. He brewed more herbs, cooked oats, and boiled water to wash Olive. I will stay until she is well, Selah said, watching him. His eyes met hers. You do not have to. I want to. He nodded once. Then stay. In the days that followed, Olive slowly improved. Her fever broke on the 4th morning. She cried for the first time in days. Selah wept, holding her close. Elias never left their side. He watched over them like it mattered. That night, as Selah stood by the fire holding her daughter, Elias came up beside her. She will be all right now. I think so. You saved her life, he said. Selah turned to him. No. You did. He looked at her for a long moment. I only gave you what I had. And what you had was everything, she whispered. His hand brushed against hers just a touch, but it was enough to make her heart stumble. I do not know what comes next, she said. Start with tonight, he said. Stay. Rest. Let me take care of you both. Just for now. She nodded. All right. And when he looked at her, really looked, there was something new in his eyes. Something warm. Something that felt like the start of something neither of them had dared hope for. The wind shifted on the 6th morning, bringing with it the scent of pine sap and damp earth. The air had cooled some overnight, and clouds folded low over the hills. Selah stood just beyond the cabin, rocking Olive against her hip, watching the sky. The baby's cheeks had taken on color again, and though her voice was still hoarse, she'd begun to fuss when she was hungry, a sound Selah had missed more than she'd let herself admit. Inside, Elias was splitting kindling with quiet precision. He worked without hurry, each swing of the axe measured and sure. Selah hadn't asked where he'd learned to do things so cleanly, but she'd noticed the way he kept his tools sharp and his hands steady, the way he checked the door latch twice before nightfall. When she stepped back inside, Olive let out a soft wail. Elias paused, set the axe aside, and reached for the kettle. She might take broth now, he said, not looking up. She's kept down milk since yesterday, Selah replied. I think she's turned the corner. Elias nodded once. Good. There's rabbit left from last night. I'll thin it out. Selah sat on the stool near the stove, settling Olive into her arms. You always live this far off? Far enough, he said, stirring the pot. Closer to folks than I used to be. What changed? He ladled broth into a tin cup and handed it to her. I got tired of ghosts. Selah didn't ask whose. The way he said it, low and without bitterness, told her enough. She tipped the cup gently, letting Olive sip. The baby's eyes blinked open, sleepy but searching. Selah brushed a curl from her forehead, heart aching with relief. I was a teacher once, she said quietly. Elias glanced over. In Missouri. Before I married. Small schoolhouse with a leaky roof. I liked it. She looked down at Olive. I thought we'd raise her there. I didn't picture Idaho. You didn't picture doing this alone. She looked up, surprised. I'm not guessing, he said. I just know what it is to lose the shape of what you thought your life was. Selah studied him. You still carry it? Most days. He didn't offer more, and she didn't press. The room settled into the hush that had grown between them. Not awkward, but careful, like both of them knew the weight of silence and didn't mind carrying it together. Later, while Olive napped on a folded quilt, Elias took a rifle from behind the door and slung it over his shoulder. I'll be back by sundown, he said. There's a spring a mile east. I'll catch trout if they're biting. Selah stood at the doorway. You think it's safe here? He paused, then turned. I wouldn't leave you if it weren't. She nodded, and he held her gaze a second longer than needed, as if waiting to see if she'd ask him not to go. She didn't. He stepped out into the trees without another word. By late afternoon, Light fell soft through the cabin window. Selah had washed Olive's clothes in the basin and hung them by the stove. She found a small bundle of linen tucked in a drawer and used, neatly folded and stitched a new bonnet for the baby. Her fingers had lost the habit, and the seams came out crooked, but it held together. When Elias returned, the scent of fish and spruce clung to his coat. He carried 2 trout in his left hand and a pouch of wild onions in the other. He set the fish on the counter, then saw the bonnet on Olive's head and paused. That's new. She needed one. He smiled, faint but real. You sew with a heavy hand. Selah raised an eyebrow. You complainin'? No, ma'am. They shared a look, and something passed between them, gentler than jest, warmer than ease. That night, after Olive had fallen asleep, Elias poured her a cup of warm cider from the jug he'd brought back the day before from a nearby trading post. Selah sat across from him, her feet tucked beneath her, the fire between them soft and low. You ever think of staying put? She asked. He leaned back in the chair. I did once. Had land near Fort Klamath. Built a fence, planted beans. Thought I might get good at it. What happened? He looked into the fire, eyes steady. The war ended, but not for everyone. There was someone I lost. After that, the place felt too still. Selah didn't move, didn't speak. She let the quiet hold what he didn't say. What about you? He asked after a while. You heading farther west? I thought so. Oregon, maybe. But I don't know anymore. You want to teach again? I might. She lifted her cup, turning it in her hands. I want her to grow somewhere with light in the windows, where folks know her name. Elias nodded slowly. That's a good thing to want. She looked at him then, not as a man who'd offered kindness out of decency, but as someone who had never once asked for anything in return. And in that moment, something inside her shifted, not sudden, not loud, just a quiet opening. Do you think this place could hold 2 more? She asked, her voice low. He didn't answer right away. Then he stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside her chair. His hand found hers, not in question, not in haste, but with the calm certainty of someone who'd waited long enough to know what mattered. It already does, he said. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the hush of coming night. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the space between them closed, not in a rush, but like something long hoped for, finally coming home. The weather turned rough 3 days later. Rain came down in steady sheets, soaking the pine needles and turning the trail to muck. In the cabin, the roof held, but barely. The old seams above the stove gave a slow, steady drip, and Elias moved a basin beneath it without comment. Selah stood at the window with Olive in her arms, watching the branches sway. The baby looked out too, her small fingers curled around the collar of her mother's dress. Her strength had returned enough that she could lift her head and track movement with her eyes. She's watching the trees, Selah said softly. Elias unfolded a map across the table, tracing a finger along a faded ridgeline. There's a trading post 3 ridges south where a wagon might pass through in another week or 2. If you meant to keep going, that's where you'd catch it. Selah turned from the window. I haven't made up my mind. He didn't look up. I wasn't pressing you. I know. She shifted Olive to her hip and crossed to the hearth. You said you used to have land near Fort Klamath. Why'd you choose this place, after? He leaned back, arms crossed. Wasn't a choice, exactly. I followed a trail west after a long winter. Found a man with a broken wheel and helped him fix it. He told me about a little lake tucked north of here. Said it was quiet, good for fishing. I came to see it. Never left. Funny how the smallest things change everything, she said. He looked over at her. You think about your husband much? Selah stiffened. He's buried near Jefferson. I told myself I'd mourn him on Sundays. Turns out grief doesn't follow a calendar. Elias nodded once, slowly. Mine's buried in Oregon. I stopped visiting after the 2nd year. Not because I forgot. Just there wasn't anything left to say. Olive stirred and Selah began to hum low in her throat, a tune she hadn't sung in months. Elias listened, quiet, until the girl settled again. You ever think about teaching again? He asked. I think about building something that lasts, she said. Walls that hold heat. A roof that doesn't leak. A place where Olive's name is on someone's lips besides mine. He stood and walked to the shelf, pulling down a tin box. There's land near the bend. Not claimed. Not easy, but good. You'd have neighbors within riding distance. Enough to start something. Selah looked up. What would I do with land? You'd raise your daughter. Maybe plant potatoes. Maybe chickens if you like noise in the mornings. And you? She asked, setting Olive into the cradle by the stove. I'd build the fence line, he said. Put in a stove that doesn't lean. Make sure no one came too close unless they meant peace. She stared at him and something behind her ribs shifted again, deeper than before. You offering? She asked. I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I don't have anything to offer back. He took a step closer. You walked 1,000 miles with a sick child in your arms and didn't stop. You've offered more than most ever could. Selah's breath caught and she looked down to hide it. Her hands trembled, just a little. I'm not afraid of hard work, she said. I know. I don't want Olive growing up watching me flinch every time someone raises their voice. Then she won't. The fire popped. Outside, the rain softened. Selah turned toward the cradle, touched the edge like it anchored her. I've never let myself think past next week, she said. Then think past it now, he said. You don't have to promise anything. Just stay long enough to see what it feels like. She looked up and met his gaze. You sure? I've never been more. That night, she didn't sleep in the chair by the fire. Elias laid a second blanket on the cot and stepped outside while she settled Olive beside her. When he returned, he didn't speak, just nodded once and sat by the hearth, watching the flames fade. In the dim quiet, Selah whispered, I'm still afraid, he answered without turning. Then we'll be afraid together. And when morning came, the rain had stopped. The roof still leaked, and the stove still leaned. But Selah woke with Olive's breath warm against her neck and Elias's coat draped over the foot of the bed. The ground outside was thick with mud, but inside, something had taken root that would hold. Not born of rescue, not shaped by pity, but built word by word from the kind of care that stays. By the end of the second week, Selah had swept out the corners of the cabin, mended the broken shutter with strips from a flour sack, and cleared a patch behind the lean-to where wild mint and yarrow had taken hold. Elias watched her work without interfering, offering tools or a second pair of hands when needed, but never stepping in unless she asked. She liked that about him, his quiet way of making space without making her feel watched. That morning, while Olive napped in the cradle bundled in the quilt from Missouri, Selah stood at the table shelling dry beans. The rhythm soothed her, the scrape of fingernails against pod, the soft thump of beans in the tin bowl. Elias came in with a bundle of willow branches tied across his shoulder. Fence post markers, he said, setting them by the door. Figured we'd mark the line before the ground freezes. Selah dusted her hands on her apron. You already picked a spot? Not without you. She stepped to the open doorway, gazing out toward the tree line. There's a curve in the ridge past the creek. Gets morning light. He nodded once. I thought the same. They packed a small satchel with bread and a wedge of salt pork, wrapped Olive snug, and walked the ridge together. The trail was soft from last week's rain but passable. Elias carried Olive, his arm strong beneath her, and Selah led the way, pausing once to rest near a fallen cedar. When they reached the spot, Selah stood still a long time. The land sloped gentle toward a bend in the stream. A ring of wind-worn stones marked where a fire had once been built, long ago. The grass stirred around her boots, golden at the tips. I could see a garden here, she said. Elias glanced toward the water. I'd dig a root cellar off the rise. Stay dry through winter. She turned toward him then. You really mean to build this with me? I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't. Selah lowered her gaze, the question sitting heavy in her chest. What if I'm not ready for more than what we are now? He passed Olive back into her arms, his voice even. I'm not asking for more than today. She nodded, her breath catching just slightly. Then today's enough. They marked the line, tying cloth to the willow posts, staking the corners. By mid-afternoon, The sun had warmed the ridge and Olive slept in a hollow they'd padded with Selah's shawl. Elias sat beside her, carving a notch into a piece of pine. Selah knelt across from him. "Where'd you learn fence work?" "Texas, after the war. I worked a cattle line near Llano. Learn to measure by eye, keep the boards even. You ever miss it?" He narrowed his eyes against the light. "I miss the sound of horses at dusk. That quiet before everything settles. But not the rest." Selah picked up a smooth stone, rolled it between her palms. "I used to think my life would be small. A porch, a school bell, maybe a birthday cake once a year." Elias looked at her then, not with pity but with understanding. "You still want small?" She shook her head slowly. "No. I want steady." He stood, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "Then we'll build steady." They walked back slow, the sun sliding toward the hills. Selah carried Olive most of the way this time, her daughter's cheek pressed to her shoulder. Elias walked beside them, not leading, not trailing, just there. When they reached the cabin, he lit the lantern while she settled Olive beneath the quilt. Later, by the fire, Selah stitched a patch on the elbow of Elias's shirt while he sanded the stock of his rifle. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain, it felt chosen. "You think we'll get snow this month?" she asked, eyes on the thread. "Up here, always a chance. We'll need to bring in more wood. Maybe trap a bit, trade for flour." Selah set the needle down. "If I stayed, I'd want to learn traps. And how to cut kindling so it doesn't smoke." He met her gaze. "Then I'll teach you." She reached for the kettle, poured him a cup without asking. "You ever think you'd want this again?" "I stopped thinking about wanting," he said. "But now that it's here, I don't plan to let it go." Selah's hand paused on the kettle. "I didn't come west to find anyone." "I know," he said. "And I didn't build this fire for anyone but myself. But you're here now, and so am I." She looked at him, the light from the hearth catching the lines near his eyes, the steadiness of his jaw. Her voice softened. "You'd really raise a child not your own?" "She's yours," he said. "That's enough for me." Selah rose slowly, crossed the space between them, and sat beside him on the bench. She didn't touch him, not yet, but her nearness said what words couldn't. "I don't know what to call this," she said. "You don't have to name it yet." "But I want to," she whispered. His hand rested palm up on the bench between them. She laid hers over it, fingers lacing slow and sure. The fire burned low. Outside, the wind had settled. Inside, the room held the quiet certainty of two people who had stopped running not because they had nowhere left to go, but because they had finally found enough. The frost came early. By the end of September, the morning grass sparkled white and the air bit sharper through the seams of Elias's coat. Selah had started waking before first light, layering Olive in wool and wrapping her in a shawl before stepping out to help Elias with whatever the day called for. She did not ask to be spared the weight of work. She asked to be taught. Elias showed her how to dry meat with smoke and ash, how to lift a rabbit from a snare without bruising the hide, how to bank a fire so it lived through the night. She learned quickly, not because she was eager, but because she didn't believe in waiting for someone else to keep her safe. That he understood. One afternoon, after hauling water from the creek, Selah stood at the cabin's side wall watching the wind stir the alder trees. Elias came up beside her, rubbing the back of his neck with a hand streaked in pitch. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked without turning. His answer came slow. "Not since Oregon." She nodded. "I hadn't thought of it either. Not until lately." He studied her face, the way her eyes stayed on the bend in the trees, not searching his but not avoiding them either. "You thinking of marrying now?" She turned to him then. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it. I wouldn't answer if I didn't." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a narrow ring wrapped in cloth. The silver was dulled, the band plain. "Was my sister's. She passed before I came west. I kept it because I didn't know what else to do." Selah took the ring without speaking, holding it against the light. "It's enough." They exchanged vows beside the creek bank a week later. No preacher, just spoken words and steady eyes. Elias carved a cross into the trunk of a cottonwood after, not as a grave marker, but as a beginning. Olive clapped her hands from Selah's hip, too young to understand the moment but feeling the rightness of it all the same. Their days fell into rhythm. Elias built a second room off the main cabin with salvaged boards. Selah stitched curtains from old feed sacks and pressed dried lavender into the corners. The cot became Olive's, and Elias fixed a cradle from pine and twine for the child they hoped might come in spring. In town, word traveled quiet. A widow from Missouri and a trapper out of Oregon making a life where the land still asked everything of you. No one came to pry. A neighbor from 2 miles off brought a jar of pickled beans and left it on their stoop without a note. One evening, while sorting dried herbs in the fading light, Selah glanced at Elias where he sat whittling a spoon for Olive. "You ever think you'd be a husband again?" He didn't look up. "Only once I met you." She smiled, not because of the words, but because of the truth behind them. The first snow came in early November. They had enough wood, enough grain, enough salt. Selah woke in the dark, her back warm against Elias's, the silence of the room broken only by Olive's quiet breathing. She pressed her hand to her belly, still flat but full of quiet hope. "Next year," Elias murmured, pulling the quilt up higher. "We'll plant squash on the south slope and teach Olive her letters. I'll build her a bench for reading. She'll want to help with the chickens. She'll chase them more than feed them." Selah laughed softly, then turned to face him. "We did this. We made something that holds." He cradled her jaw in one rough hand. "You made it first. I just came in where the door was left open." She kissed him then, slow and full, not because she had to, but because it was the only thing that made sense in the world they'd made. The winter stretched long but not cruel. They passed the cold months telling stories by lantern light, mending clothes, and tracing the map of each other's lives with new hands. When spring finally cracked the ice on the creek and green pushed through the thawed soil, Selah stood barefoot on the porch, Olive in her arms, and watched Elias drive the first fence post into the ground where they'd marked it back in autumn. She felt the child beneath her ribs move for the first time that morning. Later, she walked down to him, handed him the canteen, and laid her palm over his where it rested on the post. "You think this land is ours now?" she asked. He shook his head. "It was never about owning it." "Then what was it about?" "Belonging to something worth keeping." They stood like that a long while, the wind warm for the first time in months, the birds louder than they'd been since fall. Selah leaned into him, Olive reaching for the sky with both hands. And there they remained, a woman who had walked farther than her grief, a man who had laid down his ghosts, a girl with bright eyes and a name spoken with joy, and a home that had risen from the stillness like a promise kept. They never left that ridge. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to. The fence held. The fields grew. The children knew what it was to be safe. And every morning, Selah rose to the sound of coffee boiling and Elias's quiet voice teaching Olive how to count the chickens. They were steady. And they were in love. And it was enough.